So, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here at chapter 12. We're going to talk, this chapter is all about leases, landlords, tenants, leasehold estates, and the lease contracts, and types of tenancy and leases, and all that jazz. So, without further ado, let's get started in chapter 12 and talk about leases and landlords and tenants. So, in this chapter, we're also going to talk about those four leasehold estates, talk about provisions of the lease, various forms of eviction, and learning what eviction is. You'll learn about the effects of the Truth in Renting and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Even though we learned about that in chapter 4, we're going to revisit that Americans with Disabilities Act and the Truth in Renting Act. We touched on both of those before. We're going to discuss differences between the various types of leases and identify the primary functions of a property manager. So, to start off, let's understand what a lease is. A lease is an intangible asset, it's personal property because you don't own real estate, you're using someone else's, so therefore it is personal property. It's an intangible asset because you can't touch what a lease symbolizes, and that is your rights. So the owner of the property is the lessor. They're the one who gives the lease. They intentionally transfer most of their rights, like the right to of possession, to the tenant, who is the lessee, for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. So the lease also sets forth the length of the contract and the amount that's to be paid for the rights to use the owner's property. It also defines the rights and obligations of the parties and what exactly it is that the tenant is renting and the use it could be used for, etc., etc. Demise. Every lease has a demising clause that says that the landlord is to let the premises and the tenant is to take possession of it. So every lease has this demising clause describing what exactly the landlord is renting and that the tenant is taking possession. So because of that, a lease is both a contract and a conveyance of real estate. So let's do the highlights. And as we learned once before, too, the statute of frauds says that leases must be in writing if they're for 3 or more years, and they can be recorded if they're 2 or more. But remember, real estate licensees, any lease that we prepare doesn't matter the length, it needs to be in writing.
Got it.
Statute of frauds. There we go. Not the first time we've seen this slide. Sales contract always need to be in writing in New Jersey. There's no verbal contracts to sell real estate. However, leases can be in writing as long as they're less than 3 years. If they're 3 or more, they must be in writing. Now, this is dealing when there's no real estate agent involved, because when real estate agents are involved, it doesn't matter the length of the lease term, it always needs to be in writing. But say there's no real estate agent involved, leases must be in writing if they're for 3 or more years, and they can be recorded if they're for 2 or more. You could record those long term leases. So even though they allow you to have a lease without it being in writing when no agent's involved, that's extremely risky to do because how do you prove what the agreed upon terms were? And so, real estate licensees, we follow both statutes, Title 45, Chapter 15, as well as the Real Estate Commission's rules, the Administrative Code, or Title 11, Chapter 5. And that states for us to be entitled to a commission, leases or any contract we prepare must be in writing. So we must never have verbal agreements like that. An estate and land. Remember the definition of this in chapter 6. An estate and land describes the amount and kind of interest that one has in real property. And there's two categories of estates and land. We have freehold estates, which is the category of ownership. And there are three types of ownership estates and land. And we went over that in chapter 6. In this chapter, we're going to go over the four types of leasehold estates. A leasehold is not ownership. It's where an owner intentionally transfers some of their rights and interest in the real estate they own to the tenant for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. So a lease is considered personal property that's an incorporeal or intangible asset. Can't touch your rights. So these are the four types of leasehold estates we're going to go over. An estate for years, a periodic estate, also known as period to period, an estate or tenancy at will, and an estate or tenancy at sufferance. So rent is due. I got this stuff at a little bit different order than the book because this stuff should probably be given up front. Rent is due at specific intervals per your lease. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but in New Jersey, according to New Jersey law, if it's not stated in the lease that the rent is due at the beginning of the month on the first, it's actually due in the arrears. That's at the end of the month after you've used the property. So anyone who terminates a lease early is in breach of contract. Don't matter your reason. Holdover tenant is a tenant who did not vacate the premises after their lease term rights had expired. They've held over. Now, the landlord can either accept the holdover tenancy or they could choose to evict. If they accept the payment, then that's fine. They accepted the holdover tenancy and they could continue accepting the payments. Probably not a wise thing to do without a lease in place, though. Eviction is a legal process of removing a tenant through the court system. That's what eviction is. A landlord cannot lock out a tenant or turn off their services or physically remove them. The tenants do have rights. An eviction is the process of revoking those rights because the tenant violated the terms that they've agreed to, which granted those rights to occupy someone else's property. Or maybe the lease granting those rights had expired. Therefore, those rights had expired. Remember, I told you, you can never take away someone's rights once it's been established that they have them. However, a lease is unique because a lease creates certain rights for the tenants only if they abide by the terms of the lease that grants them those rights and they continue paying the lease. Because if they don't pay the lease, that's one of the conditions that granted you those rights. Now, if you stop paying your rent, the landlord can evict you at any time. Now, they can't physically grab you and throw you out on the street. They have to, eviction's a legal process. It must go through the court system so that then a judge can revoke those rights because you violated the terms that gave you those rights. A little easier to understand. That's why the landlord can't go in there and change the locks and shut off the water and throw you out along with all your stuff on the street. They have to go through the court and have the court be able to do that. So there are 4 leasehold estates. So let's highlight that. Estate for years, periodic estate, tenancy at will, and a tenancy at sufferance. We're going to be going over each one of those now. So now we're going to go over the four distinguishing characteristics of these leasehold estates. An estate for years is for a definite period of time. Right next to that, it's for a fixed term with an end date. For a fixed term with an end date. So, regardless of its name, estate for years, it doesn't need to be for a period of years. The key characteristic is that it's for a fixed term with an end date. You know when it's going to end. Could be for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12, 18, 24, whatever you agree to. It doesn't need to be for a period of years, though. An estate from period to period, these periodic estates, they also have a date in it, but it's a renewal date. So let's write that next to automatically renews, that it has a renewal date in it. And the estate at will, this is for an indefinite period of time. It's undefined. So underline that word indefinite and highlight indefinite period of time. And an estate at sufferance is without the landlord's consent. So we'll go over each one of these now in detail. Once you guys have all this stuff highlighted, written down, and wrapped up over there, let me know once you do.
Got it.
Got
All right. So an estate for years is a lease for a definite period of time. It's for a fixed term. It does have an end date in it. So the landlord doesn't need to tell you when to go. At the end of the term, if you did not sign a new lease, you got to go. A periodic estate from period to period, this is a lease with a stated term, but that term will automatically renew. So instead of an expiration date in the agreement, that date is a renewal date. And if the tenant doesn't want to renew, they got to let the landlord know that they're going to terminate it, because these leases will automatically renew for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. 1 month will renew for a month, 3 months will renew for 3 months, 6 months for 6 months, a year for another year, 2 years for 2 years, 2 more years. So the tenant needs to give the landlord the notice to quit, that they're not going to renew. And there are specific amounts of time of notice that the tenant has to give the landlord that they're not going to renew. We're going to be going over those once we get up to each one of these that we're going to go over in detail one at a time. This is just a quick rundown before we get into that. An estate or tenancy at will is for an indefinite period of time. It's undefined how long the term is. And that estate or tenancy at sufferance is without the landlord's consent. So let's go over the first one, estate for years. Don't let the name fool you. It's for a fixed term with an end date, but it doesn't have to be for a period of years. It could be for a week, 3 months, a year, 2 years. It's for a specific defined period of time. That's its key characteristic. It has an end date in it. You know when it's going to end. No notice to quit is required to terminate at the end of the lease term, because if you didn't sign a new lease, it automatically is dead, right? It expires with that expiration date that's in the lease. Unless you signed a new agreement, you got to go. So let's highlight that, those details there on page 228 under estate for years.
Got it.
Okay. Everybody good?
Yes, sir.
So periodic estate or period to period is a lease with a renewal date rather than the expiration date. These leases automatically renew for the same amount of time that the original lease was written for. Either party may give notice to quit, to terminate before the lease renews. Now, how much notice is required would depend on the term of the lease. So, as an example, we see here week to week, 1 week's notice is required. Month to month, 1 month's notice, and if it's for a term of years, 3 months' notice is required to terminate before the lease expires. Otherwise, it'll automatically renew for the same amount of time that the lease was written for. And with a periodic estate, when a tenant gives their notice to quit and they don't vacate, they could be held liable for double the entire rent for each month they've held over. Because look, the landlord could have already lined up another tenant to occupy those premises. And if you didn't get out when you said you were going to, now the landlord's in breach of contract for that new tenant. So they're going to have to put them up somewhere. That's why they could charge the tenant that did not vacate, that said that they would, double the rent for as long as they stay there. You'll need to know these time periods, by the way, how much notice to quit is needed as well. So let's do some highlights. And I want you to cross out the word indefinite here because I do not want you to, even though it makes sense in this sentence, I do not want you to associate the word indefinite with a periodic estate because you will be associating the word indefinite with a tenancy at will. The questions on exam do. So I don't want you to associate that word indefinite with periodic estate. You could cross it out and it'll still make sense in the sentence here. You know, when the landlord and tenant enter into agreement that continues for a length of time without a specific end date. Rent, however, is payable in definite intervals. Okay, so it still makes sense even without the word indefinite there. Okay. And what's that holdover tenant? It's a tenant that occupies the property after the stated end date in their lease. They've held over. They did not leave. It's not necessarily a negative thing as long as they're continuing to pay their rent, though, right?
That's true. As long as the money's coming in.
Yeah. Just waiting on y'all. Let me know when you got it all. Okay.
I'm good.
Got it.
So an estate or tenancy at will is for an indefinite period of time. No length of time is specified in the lease term. Either party must give 3 months' notice to terminate this type of estate, a tenancy at will. Both parties must agree to the indefinite term with that 3 month notice that needs to be given. An example where this could be used is where a landlord's been notified that the state's taking their property by eminent domain. They're not sure when that's going to happen. In the meantime, they need to pay their mortgage and their taxes and all that. They got to still pay their bills. So they could rent out to a tenant, but they don't know for how long. So they say you could rent there as long as I allow it. Okay, at my will. Once the state notifies me officially of a date that they're going to take the property, I'll have at least 3 months notice to give you. So you're going to have 3 months notice to find another place and leave. Okay. That is a tenancy at will. So I don't know how long I can rent to you, but I'll rent to you as long as I'm allowed to, and then I'll give you a 3 month notice that you got to go. Okay. That's the tenancy at will. And if the tenant wants to leave early, they could also give the landlord a 3 month notice. We good?
Good to go.
Yep.
So the estate or tenancy at sufferance is when a tenant had a valid lease. That lease had expired. The tenant did not renew the lease and they did not move out. So therefore, they're now a holdover tenant. But the difference is they're not paying rent. So a holdover tenant not paying rent can be evicted at any time. Non-payment of rent is the only reason where a landlord does not need to give any prior notice to a tenant before starting the eviction process. It's not squatters' rights, which could create an easement by prescription. This tenant was once a lawful tenant with a valid lease. Now, just as fee simple absolute is the highest estate in land, tenancy at sufferance is the lowest. Your rights expired, they didn't move out, and you're not paying rent. So the landlord can remove that tenant themselves, or they cannot remove the tenant physically themselves. The tenants still have rights, and those rights have to be revoked by the courts to get them out. So the tenants' rights expired. They didn't move out. They're not paying rent. So every month they remain there, they cause the landlord to suffer. Thus, the name tenancy at sufferance. Makes sense? So let's do the highlight here. But it's important because the book didn't write it in here that they're also not paying rent. That's a that's a that's a little detail that they left out.
Got it.
Okay. So here are a little recap of what we just went over again. Demise is a transfer of property by lease, not to be confused with devise, which is a transfer of property by will upon death. Leasehold estate is the tenant's right to occupy someone else's land, and they're considered personal property, which is an intangible assets. And a holdover tenant is a tenant whose rights to occupy real estate had expired, but they did not vacate at the end of the lease term. That's what a holdover tenant is. And the four types of leasehold estates, once again, is an estate for years, which need not be for years. Its key characteristic is that it has a definite ending date. If you don't renew the lease, you got to be out by that date. No notice to quit is required to be given to the tenant at the end of a estate for years. Periodic estate has no specific termination date. It automatically renews for the amount of time that it was originally written for. And a tenant needs to give a notice to quit if they don't want to stay there because the lease will automatically renew. And so there's specific amounts of time they need to give. If it's for 1 week, 1 week's notice is needed. 1 month, 1 month's notice. If it's for a year or more, 3 months notice is needed to terminate. Tenancy at will is for an indefinite period of time. It's not defined how long you can be there, but either party has to give 3-month notice to terminate at the end of the lease term or to quit the lease term. A tenancy at sufferance, you had a valid lease, it expired, you didn't get out, you're not paying rent. Every day you stay there, you cause the landlord to suffer. So a tenant tenant at sufferance can be evicted at any time because they're not paying rent. Okay. Okay, let's look over the standard provisions of a lease, and it's just like any contract, really. You got to have the four essential elements, but you got to have capacity to the contract, so competent parties. You have to have a demising clause stating exactly what the landlord is doing here. What exactly they're leasing to the tenant, and they're turning over possession to the tenant. What exactly can the tenant use? If you don't specify in the lease any limitations of what the tenant cannot use, like they don't have access to the garage because that's where I keep my car and my tools, well, then the tenant has access to the entire property. Okay. You have access to only part of the basement or part of the attic for storage. Well, if you don't specify that in the lease, the tenant has access to everything. Description of the premises and what exactly is being rented and what's excluded. Term must be clearly stated. The duration, or if it's at will. And how and when the rent must be paid has to be specified. If not stated in the lease, New Jersey law says it's due in the arrears. What's another name for your rear? Your behind? So the rent is due behind at the end, the rear end of the month. The opposite of in advance that most leases state. So it's important for landlords to write in the leases when the rent is due, because if they don't, the tenant can live there the entire month and they don't need to pay the rent. It's not due until the end of the month. Now, leases must be in writing for a term of more than 3 years. However, they can be recorded if 2 or more. But if a real estate licensee is involved, it doesn't matter the length. It always needs to be in writing. And signatures are required. For any lease to be valid, just like any contract, it needs to be signed by all parties. Okay, there is no paragraph in this book about window guards, but they are on exams. So go to highlight section, put a highlighted box around section 36 of the actual lease contract on page 235. Because you'll need to know this. You're just putting a highlighted box around section 36 on page 235 of the where the lease is. Now, I'm not going to read it from here. I created a slide separate for you just about window guards, which you can snap a picture of if you like. The stuff you need to know for your exams is here in this box. However, I have more information about window guards, which could be useful in your everyday business, because I have additional information about different types of buildings here. So window guards, what are window guards? Window guards prevent the windows from opening more than 4 inches for where a child can fall out. They could shimmy their way through and fall out and get hurt. However, window guards, it applies to buildings with 2 or less rental. When it applies to buildings with 2 or less rental units, window guards must be installed by the landlord. If a child 10 years of age or younger will be living there or regularly present. If the tenant gives the landlord written request to install those window guards. Homeowners associations are responsible for installing window guards in hallways and the common areas. and it's only required for first floor units if the window sill's at least 6 feet above grade, above the ground, because then they could get hurt. What about second, third, and fourth, 15th floors? Well, I guess if there's a hazard there that could cause harm, then the window guards could be installed as well. However, you also may have fire escapes, and if you got fire escapes, you can't have window guards. So, buildings with 3 or more units, landlords must install window guards, unless the tenants indicate in writing to them that they specifically do not want them. And the landlord has to ask them every year before February 15th, and then have the tenant fill out a form stating that they don't want the window guards. If window guards are installed, they must be inspected twice a year, once between March 1st and May 1st, and again between September 1st and December 1st. And they need to keep a log recording the results of the inspection, the condition of the window guards, and the bolts that are used to install them, because they have to use one-way tamper-resistant screws or bolts. So, what happens if you have air conditioning units in the window? Well, there cannot be any space greater than 4 inches on the sides or 4.5 inches on the sides that would allow a child to slip through. And landlords can charge tenants up to $20 for each window guard installed. Okay. Any questions about window guards? This
Nope.
is what they look like. Here it is from the exterior. You see these bars, they make sure there's not more than 4.5 inches available for a child to shimmy through. This is the way it looks like from the inside. And here's the installation of the window guards with L-shaped stops here so that the window can't be opened beyond the length of the window guard. Some window manufacturers have those plastic tabs that they pull out. And when you pull them out, good luck trying to get it back in. You got to really manhandle it. Short of breaking the window, it's really tough to get those back in. Okay, so here are some of the typical provisions added to any lease. The use of the premises, the term of the lease, the start and end date or renewal date, or if it's at will. The agency relationship, just like any purchase contract, the agency relationship has to be disclosed. An acknowledgement that the CIS has been given to the tenant. All right. The Opinion 26 notice needs to be the cover page of any lease. What is that? Advises you the right of hiring a lawyer, right? So before you see the lease, you got the Opinion 26 notice sitting on top of it. Now, I know most people don't use attorneys for leases, but they can. And therefore, if they're not using an attorney, that's when we need to use the Opinion 26 notice. There has to be a federal lead paint disclosure for any property that's being leased that's built prior to 1978. First needs to be filled out by the owner, then provided to the tenant, along with the pamphlet to protect your family from lead. And the lead paint disclosure first filled out by the owner and given a 10-day opportunity to conduct an inspection, or they could waive that opportunity if they wish to close any sooner. Here's a link to that truth in renting, or I'm sorry, the lead paint addendum. All right. And New Jersey, we now have our own law pertaining to lead, in addition to that federal law that does require inspection, not just a disclosure of the knowledge of any known lead hazards. Uh, so, effective July 2022, New Jersey's lead safe certification law requires lead inspections and remediation at the time of tenant turnover or by July 24th, 2024, if there was no tenant turnover. And a number of properties are exempt from this requirement, and those would be those built after 1978 when lead was banned, those certified free of lead based paint, single family and two family seasonal rentals, units located in buildings with three or more units that have been registered as lead free and have no outstanding lead violations in the last 5 years, or they've been certified, has a lead safe certificate issued within the last 2 years. If you want more information about these New Jersey lead safe law, you could go to the Department of Community Affairs, nj.gov DCA website, and get more info on that. I got the links here too. Security deposits. What are security deposits for? Well, it's a guarantee that the rent's going to be paid, and it's to cover any damages that the tenant does. Money for a security deposit has to be placed in a special interest bearing account used only for security deposits. So if you're a landlord, you can't put the tenant's security deposit in your savings account. It must be put in a bank account used only for tenants' security deposits. The tenant must be notified where the money's being held, and the tenant must get their interest earned. So it has to be in an interest bearing account. So tenants must get their interest earned, paid, or credited to them on the anniversary date of the lease. And the penalty for the landlord could be that they're required to pay double the entire security deposit back to the tenant if they did not give them the credit for the couple pennies that their money had earned for the security deposit. The maximum security deposit that a landlord can charge by law is 1.5 times the monthly rental figure as security. There's no maximum security limits for commercial real estate. They could charge as much as they could get away with. It's not uncommon for a 3 month security deposit be charged. Pet security can be charged as long as the total security deposits do not exceed the 1.5 times monthly rental figure. It doesn't matter what you call it, whether you label it pet security or just security or just in case deadbeat don't pay me rent security or whatever you want to call it. It's however you wish to label it. It's still security, including any rent paid in advance. That's still considered security. They're not allowed to charge more than at the inception of the lease. The landlord's not allowed to charge more than 2.5 times the monthly rental figure. So the first month's rent in advance and the month and a half security deposit, 2.5 times the monthly rental figure. Service animals cannot be charged additional rent or fees because they're not pets. A service animal should be considered a part of the tenant's disability. So if you deny them, that means you're discriminating against the tenant for their disability. Give you another way to think about it. So security deposits must be returned within 30 days of the lease termination if there were no damages. And the penalty for violating this rule is double the entire security deposit once again. Now, if there are damages and the landlord's going to deduct them from the security deposit, they have to give the tenant an itemized report for how much they're charging for each repair or for each thing that they're charging for. They can't just be like, you ain't getting your security deposit back because you messed up my place. Okay. They have to give an itemized list of how you messed it up. You know, the hole in the wall here, or the hole in the wall there, or you left garbage behind and we had to pay somebody to come in and remove it and then dispose of it. You left that old broken furniture behind. There was writing on the wall. We need to paint the walls, and this is the fee for that. Or there was you left it in an odorous state, so maybe smoking in the apartment, or cooking with strong spices that may leave odors in the apartment, uh, or whatever other reason the odors are there. If the property is sold, the landlord must turn over security deposit to the new owner, because then that new owner is responsible for returning the security deposit to the tenant. It's always a good idea to take pictures or even do a video, a walkthrough of an apartment before and after a tenant's lease term. Tenant should do the same. So let's go highlight those things now in the book, even though I went over a little more details than what you're going to find here in the book. But here, let's do the highlights.
Got it.
Everybody got it?
Yes, sir.
All set.
So late payments can be charged to tenants if they're late paying the rent, but that's only if the landlord specified when the rent is due. Because if they don't, when is the rent due?
The end. The
At
rear
the
end.
end of the term, in the arrears. So late payments can be charged to tenants, but you should check your local rent control ordinances if your municipality has them. Not all municipalities have rent control laws, and those that do, you need to check. Some tenants must be given a 5-day grace period free from late fees and penalties. And those tenants are those who are relying on Social Security benefits, old age railroad retirement pensions, or any governmental or quasi-governmental pension or payment. They must be given a 5-day grace period free from any late fees or penalties. A lot of landlords know that they need to give 5-day grace period, but they're not sure why or to who. Well, here's why and to who. Because if you're relying on the government check to pay you so that you could pay the rent, if the government's late, they don't want the landlord penalizing the tenant. So always check your local rent control laws before charging any late fees or penalties. They can restrict you from charging them, or they could limit how much you do charge or when you could charge. So here's the highlights for the late payments. Okay. Leases carry, let's see, the possession of leased premises. Tenants cannot take possession until the date specified on the lease, and not until after the city inspections have been performed. You, as a real estate licensee, I cannot stress this enough. Do not be a sucker. Do not open up the rented premises that they signed a lease for, maybe even giving you the first month's rent security deposit for. Do not open up the premises and allow them to put one bag in there for storage, one box, anything before the lease term begins. Licensees should never give a tenant the keys, even only to store a few belongings before the lease term begins. You'll be risking your license by doing so. And you're putting the landlord at jeopardy too. If that tenant should now start not paying the rent, they still need to be evicted. Or they gave you a check, but it turns out that that check now bounced and they already got a bag in there. Well, they're in possession of the premises. Landlord would have to go through the eviction process to get them out. And now they could lock themselves in there, and you just put that landlord in a very bad position. All right. I'm not sure if you guys watched this video. I wasn't here for that chapter 4. I had to substitute that day. Can a landlord enter an apartment without the permission of the tenant? The answer is no. They can only enter without prior permission in cases of emergencies like gas leaks or flooding. Otherwise, they're breaking an entry. They're guilty of breaking an entry, and they could have criminal charges filed against them. A trespass complaint may be filed by the tenant with the local police department under New Jersey Criminal Code for defiant trespass. That's under New Jersey Statutes 2A:339-6. And you can find that here in the Truth in Renting booklet. If you don't have the Truth in Renting booklet, I could share the link with you here. I know we also have it in our Class Links Word document, but let me give you a copy of this Truth in Renting booklet. All landlords and tenants must abide by these rules, even though this Truth in Renting booklet only needs to be given to tenants in buildings with 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in. So,
Top story tonight, a Hoboken couple says their privacy was violated. Their bedroom security camera caught a maintenance worker going through their things.
But it's what they touched that has them still uneasy. News 12 New Jersey's Erica Such joining us in the newsroom with more on this story. Erica.
The couple tells us they purchased this security camera to just watch out when anyone was in their apartment, but never expected to capture an employee of their building going through their underwear. Take a look.
It said there was a notification for motion, so I checked it.
The Rivington resident Alex Sacchetti says he was at work just a few weeks ago when his security camera in his bedroom captured moments a maintenance worker did something out of the ordinary.
I started watching, and the man was, going towards the dresser. I was like, wow, that's strange. And then he opened it. He was going through my fiance's underwear. And, after I watched the entire event, there was potentially other lewd acts that took place, but mainly just going through my entire apartment.
The worker is seen checking the bedroom door, closing it, and turning off the lights before going into the corner of the room, blocked by pillows on the camera. Sacchetti says he quickly called management and alerted them. That's when this moment shows the man looking at the camera when he answers his radio call to leave the unit.
It was pretty much your whole privacy is violated.
Sacchetti says his fiance has been so upset by the situation, she's staying elsewhere for now. They filed a report with Hoboken police, but were told this.
He had the right to be in here, and apparently anything that took place is not a crime.
I would have stopped and demanded to speak to a supervisor or he should have went through his truth in renting booklet, because he would have learned there that worker was in defiant trespass. He violated the law for defiant trespass. He was not there to do maintenance. They did not give him permission to be in there. He just used his pass key to enter their apartment, rifle through his fiance's underwear drawer, and then go masturbate in the corner in it. That's disgusting. I don't blame her for staying elsewhere. That's disgusting. But if I were him, this guy seems way too laid back. I would be blowing up on them police. I'd be like, what do you mean he didn't do nothing illegal? He should have not have been in my apartment. They weren't there to do any treatment for pest control. There were no emergencies. I did not give him prior permission to be in there. That's breaking an entry. It doesn't matter if he has a pass key. The law does not allow that. So this Hoboken Police Department was full of crap and seemed to be protecting the landlord, or they were just lazy.
The two have been back and forth with Equity Apartments, who owns the complex, but says their responses have been lacking empathy.
There's been some outreach from some sort of manager or something, I'm not exactly sure. But as far as oversight or, hey, so sorry this happened to you, none of that.
And while this situation still leaves him uneasy, Sacchetti says it's a warning for others.
People here or elsewhere that have buildings should just have some sort of surveillance to fall back on.
And the couple tells us they're hoping to switch apartments in the near future. We did reach out to Equity Apartments for comment, but did not hear back.
What does it matter if you switched apartments? You still got the same maintenance people in the building, still got the access key to it. That's horrible. All right, so can tenants make improvements to the apartments that they're renting? Not without the landlord's prior written permission, they can't. They can't even paint the walls. So improvements require written permission from the landlord, even just painting a unit. I tell you what, I used to be a superintendent of an apartment building, and I'll tell you, you let tenants just paint the units without having a conversation first, they're going to start painting the bedrooms black or like a dark purple, or here was a good one, Hello Kitty pink. That hot Pepto-Bismol pink color. Tell you what, when they move out, if they don't paint it back, it is hell to cover. That stuff bleeds through layers and layers of paint. And not just paint, but primers and paints. You need to actually, here's a trick to it. You know how to cover up difficult colors when people paint their apartments black or Hello Kitty pink or something like that? You could get a dark brown primer and prime the apartment with that. And then you could go into lighter shades of color of paint afterwards. That's the trick. I learned that one by painting this lady's apartment 6 times before I was finally able to cover it up.
You can also get your primer tinted. Did you know that?
The primer's tinted?
Yeah, you can get them tinted the color of the paint. Well,
it still needs to go darker primer either way. If you're going, because we were painting them eggshell. It's like a neutral color. It's like an off-white. And I primered it many times and painted it, and that pink still bled through. Then I went and I got a lot of money. I spent a lot of money on those expensive Valspar, those one coat primer paint stuff.
Yeah.
Hello Kitty pink. It cannot prevent Hello Kitty pink from bleeding through. So I went to the paint store and I was like, what the F, dude? How do I stop this? I mean, I painted and primed 6 layers already. I used that $100 a gallon Valspar paint crap and it's still bleeding through. What do I do? The guy, he started laughing. He was like, He's like, here. He's like, you got to go dark. Here's a dark brown primer. You got to use this, and then you could go lighter in the colors. Otherwise, if you don't go dark with the primer first, then you're not going to be able to go to lighter colors. So I'm not sure about the primer paint that you're talking about. I don't know if that's the Valspar that you're talking about. That's the same. It's the one coat that's the primer and paint.
No, I'm just saying that if you want, so like they have different types of primer right there. That's just plain primer. But
Yeah.
Home Depot or Lowe's, if you want it, you can get your primer tinted the same color as your paint. So it's acting the same, right? It's acting like a paint and primer one shot. You know, just for if something lighter, you know, comes up and you're just like, hey, I want to do that. Just
Yeah, I mean, I use the light color primers. They wouldn't hold it back. They really wouldn't. So I mean, but when I did the brown primer, it's not like it was dark, but it was a brown. It was clearly a brown primer.
Yeah.
And when I used that, and then I went lighter in color, it didn't bleed through anymore. You know, so it did work. But damn, how many coats of paint, the labor of the paint, and let alone the cost of the paint, you know. So she was shocked when she didn't get any of her security deposit back. But the landlords gave her permission to paint it that Hello Kitty pink with the rule that she had to get it painted back to the neutral eggshell color. But her attitude was when she moved out, she was like, you take care of it, just deduct it from my security. Okay, I did. Didn't get nothing back. All right. So the trade fixtures, those are different than fixtures. What is a fixture? It's an item that was once personal property that's attached to the real estate in such a manner that it became part of the real estate. However, trade fixtures are still considered personal property when they're attached to the structure. Trade fixture is a fixture that's used to conduct a business, like the sinks in a beauty salon, the pumps at a gas station, shelving and refrigerator units in supermarkets, etc., etc. So the tenant can remove trade fixtures as long as they remove them before the lease expires and they return that premises back to its condition that it was in when they moved in. In other words, like say that they rent a space and they want to put in a beauty salon and they put in those sinks. Okay, sure, they could take those sinks with them, but you can't just leave leaky pipes, you know, exposed there. You got to tuck them back behind the walls and cap them off and leave it the way that it was when you first rented. So the tenant can remove items before the lease expires. It is possible for a trade fixture, which is personal property, however, to become a fixture, part of the real estate, if the tenant does not remove it before the lease expiration date. So let's highlight on page 240 where it says improvements, right above that, trade fixtures, tangible personal property / chattel, because that's what chattel is, tangible personal property. And trade fixtures are used to conduct a business, a trade. So even though it is customary to provide that such fixtures may be removed by the tenant before the lease expires. Now, in residential property, you need permission from the landlord before you can make any improvements. So say that the landlord gives you permission in residential property to replace the ceiling light with a ceiling fan light. They're also going to require you have a licensed electrician do it so that you don't get zapped by old Sparky and burn down their building or kill yourself. And when you move, though, can you take that ceiling fan with you?
Yeah,
You
just
would
take.
that's the landlord's property. Now they could deduct that from your security deposit if you just remove it without asking them. They gave you permission to do an improvement. Why would they give you permission to destruct it? To unimprove it. I mean, even if the landlord were to give you that permission, you should get it in writing, because they could deduct it from your security deposit, because they gave you permission to do an improvement, but that's not your property now. You did an improvement to the real estate. What is a fixture? An item that was once personal property, but now it's part of the real estate. And who owns the real estate? The landlord does. So you can't start removing those things, not without the landlord's prior written permission, just like you needed it to install them. We all good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so maintenance of the premises. Leases carried an implied warranty of habitability. That means that they're fit for human habitation and there's no condition that causes a threat to the health or safety of its occupants. So tenants must return those premises in the same condition that they received them. Landlords are responsible for repairs unless specified otherwise in the lease. Tenants are responsible for any damages that they do, of course. And the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, inspects rental buildings with at least 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit that the landlord lives in. They're responsible for inspecting those at least once every 5 years. This state inspection is often referred to as the green card inspection. Has nothing to do with immigration. They call it the green card because when you pass the inspection, it used to be that they printed it on this heavy duty paper that was green in color, and it had what do you call it, the watercolored logos of the state and stuff on there. But either way, the pass inspection certificate that has to be hung in a common area like the hallway or whatever, its color was green. So the industry lingo is we call the state inspection the green card inspection. Hey, is the green card up to date on that property? What are we asking? When's the last time you did the state inspection, that 5-year state inspection? Is it up for renewal soon? If we're selling a property that's a rental property, we better make sure it's up to date. That we need to get the inspection done in a month. You better get it done now, because anybody who's going to buy it, their agents and their attorneys, they're going to be like, you need to get that state inspection done, because state inspectors, when they come in, they always find stuff wrong. And then it'll be the landlord's responsibility to fix it and bring it up to code before you buy it. That's the smart bet that you should do. Okay, so it's important in those buildings with 3 or more rental units, when the landlord's not living in it, you don't count the unit the landlord's living in. There has to be 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord's in. Those are the same buildings that we give the truth in renting booklets to tenants, and that require that state inspection once every 5 years, the green card inspection. Now, if rent is withheld by a tenant to force the landlord to make necessary repairs due to uninhabitable or dangerous conditions, it should be placed in an escrow bank account or have it somewhere so that you could pay the landlord that back rent later after they've done the repairs. See, this is one of those situations where a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, with the stress of a little bit of knowledge, because you have sometimes tenants that they know their rights, kinda, where they know that they can withhold paying you the rent until you do certain necessary repairs. Sure, that's true. But now the landlord did the repairs, and then the tenant thinks, okay, well, now I can just start paying the rent from this day forward. I don't have to pay all that rent that I've been withholding from you. That's going to get you evicted. You were you were leasing that premises still, you were just withholding the rent to force the landlord to do the repair. You don't just start paying the rent from that day forward. You got to pay all that back rent that you've been withholding as well. And this is what jams tenants up usually. And then they go to landlord tenant court, and the judge asks them, well, do you have all that rent money to pay the landlord that you've been withholding from them? If you don't, you got to go. Eviction granted.
And all that money is due immediately once the improvements are made?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, you should have had it to be paying the landlord the rent anyway, right?
Yeah.
You were withholding it. What'd you do? Go spending it on other stuff? You didn't think you had to pay the landlord? So you have to pay it all at once they've done those repairs. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's do the highlights on that. Page 240. Under implied warranty of habitability. And then here's about the green card state inspection. I said put my notes in a little bracket around that paragraph. And then this paragraph has to deal with repairs. That New Jersey does recognize the tenant's rights to repair and deduct. So the tenant may withhold rent until repairs have been made, or if repairs are vital and the landlord does not make them within a reasonable time. Well, what is reasonable? Reasonable is the same amount of time that it would take you to get a contractor to come in, give quotes, and then do the work. You should extend that same courtesy to a landlord. Like if the roof was leaky and we're at the peak of the roofing season, it may not be so easy to get a roofing crew to come out and repair the roof right away immediately. So you gotta extend that same. You cannot hold the landlord to unreasonable expectations to get that job done when you can't even do it that quick, right? And when tenants do do the repairs and then deduct them from the rent, they have an obligation to save the landlord money by getting at least 3 price quotes from different contractors. And now I know some tenants, they know the laws and they try to pull a fast one. So they go and they get 3 overpriced price quotes to get the work done. And just so they could stick it to the landlord or have their friend or cousin who's a contractor overbill them. The landlord can say, go F yourself, and still take you to court to evict you for not paying the rent because you're deducting this amount. And then the judge will look at it and say, okay, well, let me see your price quotes. There are standard reasonable price quotes for different types of jobs. And if yours is all of your price quotes are ridiculously high, the landlord and the courts are not fools. They'll see this and they'll be like, no. These are ridiculously high price quotes. You're trying to stick it to your landlord here. They're not going to grant that. So you have an obligation to try to save the landlord money if you're going to be doing those work. So you can have those repairs done and deduct them from their cost of the rent. And if the rent is withheld, it should be put in an escrow account. Such measures, especially to claim constructive eviction, that's a term we're going to learn, should not be undertaken first without consulting an attorney. Now, where landlord furnishes heat and heat is included in your rent, between October 1 and May 1, all rooms must be heated to at least 68 degrees from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and at least 65 degrees at night. All right, go ahead. Somebody say it. That's freezing. That's cold.
I actually love it that way. That's perfect. Though most people would agree that it's freezing.
Some people say that, that's freezing. No, it ain't. 32 degrees.
Mine have mine set at 68 with the fan on.
Really?
Yeah. Literally fans blowing in my face, so that's good for me.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of people saying that lately too. I'm in the same boat. I think about between 70 and 72 may be comfortable, but even at that, I like to have the window open a little bit to get a little cool breeze coming in. Just like a little bit. But I got my elderly mom living here, so she's like 74, 75, and it's like it's stifling in here. But yeah, but when heat is included in the rent, often you don't even have a control over that.
Yeah.
Um, when it's warm out, it seems like the heat is cranking. But when it's cold out, it's like, oh my God, it's not heat. I don't feel nothing. It's freezing in here. So that's kind of tough. Especially when they got one boiler that heats all the units. All right, everybody have all these notes, these highlights, and then these brackets here explaining what this stuff is.
Yes, sir.
Okie doke. So the state inspection, often referred to as the green card inspection, needs to be done at least once every 5 years when you have 3 or more rental units, not counting the one the landlord lives in. And the state does the inspection, but who at the state? The DCA, the Department of Community Affairs. They have their own state inspectors that conduct those inspections at least once every 5 years. And hotels and motels must be inspected at least once every 3 years. And those inspections can be spot inspections without a prior appointment. They can just pop in and say, we're doing an inspection. All right. We already spoke about this heat thing. All right. Assignment of leases. That's when a tenant, remember we went over this last chapter. We were talking about assignment. What is assignment? It's when somebody assigns their contractual obligations to someone else to take over. Most leases and purchase contracts specifically forbid assignment of your rights and duties and obligations to another. But if the landlord were to allow it, you would not be relieved of your original obligation to abide by the lease terms. So if the person who you sublease to assigning your obligations to this other person, if they're not paying the rent or violating the lease in another way, you will still be held liable for that you're still hold primary responsibility. So if you wanted to be relieved of that obligation, you'd have to novate the contracts through novation, right? Novation is substituting the old contract with a new one, where the old contract has no legal force anymore. Or you could do a novation of the parties, just substitute the person formally named in the contract with someone else, relieving the original person of their duties or obligations. All right. Destruction of the premises. Tenants are always responsible for damages that they do. Now, this could be written up in many different ways in leases. I used to have it that, tenants are responsible for any intentional damages they do, but they're also responsible for repairs, for the first $50 of repairs. Or $100 of repairs or whatever it is. And then the tenant would be less likely to be constantly reporting, this broke, that broke, that broke, that broke. And until it gets really crazy. Remember, I was a superintendent of an apartment building. We started doing this because of one tenant who, it was like once every couple months, and then it turned to every month, and then it's like every couple weeks. The guy's like, the faucet's leaking, the faucet's leaking, the faucet's leaking. And it's like, wait a minute. We just repaired the faucet. Or we just changed the washers in it, and it's leaking again. Why? Because the guy's OCD nutty. When you turn off the faucet and the water stops running? Well, if there was one drop that still came out of that faucet, he would crank it and crank it and crank it until he broke the washer. So we just replaced the washer, and he would crank it and crank it until he split the washer. And then eventually what he ended up doing is he ended up stripping the threads on the handle because he cranked it so much. So it's like, now we got to break open the wall to cut out the actual valve and replace it, if it got to that point. Because you could, on some of them, we could also pull out the valve a different way and get that replaced, and replace those units, with the spline that had the splines on them and such. But this guy did so much damage. He would do that, and when he stripped those splines, then he'd put what do you call it, the vice grips on there to turn on and off the faucet. So tenants can do some stupid stuff. So okay, here's that notice to quit requirement on page 241 for the different types of leasehold estates. Remember, with an estate for years, no notice to quit needs to be given at the end of the lease term. You got to go. Tenancy at will, 3 months notice, and a periodic estate is varying times of notice that need to be given depending on the length of the lease. And so here we got it here in the book. We can put a highlighted box around that on the bottom of page 241. This could be located. Okay. Now, the Truth in Renting booklet, that needs to be given to any tenant in buildings with 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in. Same buildings that require the state green card inspection. Truth in Renting booklet is published annually, and it informs the landlords and tenants of their rights and duties and obligations to each other. Although it's no longer printed, so that means that you could download it as a PDF and print it out yourself, or supply a link to the tenants. But I would not just give them a link. I would supply them a link, and I would print it and get them to sign off they got a copy of it, so that they don't start complaining later, oh, you never gave it to me, or I don't have a printer, I wasn't able to get them. Well, you got a link, you could see it, it's on the website. I can't afford internet. Okay, whatever their excuse is going to be, you should print it out and have one copy available for them. Make it attach it to the lease. At least landlords should do that anyway. So this applies to residential properties requiring that green card inspection. And it's available here on the DCA's website, the Truth in Renting booklet. I already gave you the link to it. But here's the link to the DCA's website, and it takes you here. All right. Ooh. What is this? Landlord tenant information forms, publicly available. They're available in English and Spanish. The booklet's available free and may be downloaded from this website. The booklet is no longer available for sale through this department. Both landlords and tenants may print copies directly from the website. All right. And there's a lot of related links and information here about energy assistance, neighborhood programs, eviction protection, homelessness protection. So here's for the landlords, the Truth in Renting guide stuff related for the landlords. And in here they go on talking about how landlords need to notify tenants of the flood risks as well, as when you're selling a property if it's in a flood zone, right? Then they have municipalities with rent control or regulations. governing rent increases, rent control survey. Okay, so that's just information for the landlord. Information for the tenants. You get the Truth in Renting Act, that's the law. Here's the Truth in Renting Guide booklet, available in English or Spanish for download. Online guide. Rental assistance resources for state rental assistance programs and Section 8 housing choice vouchers. It's a rental subsidy. Oh, and a lot of energy assistance, rent control, laws, rules, regulations, yada, yada, yada. Okay, but basically they could get the guide right here in English or Espanol. All right. And that link was recently changed, but I updated it here on our slideshow. And this is the DCA website. There you go. All right. So, beginning March 20th, 2024, every landlord must provide a notice to prospective renters, including whether the rental property is located in FEMA's special flood hazard area or moderate flood hazard areas, and actual knowledge that the rental premises or any portion of that rental premises, such as tenant parking spaces, have been subjected to flooding in the past. Landlords may print a copy of the Truth in Renting booklet and flood risk notice form, which can be found right there on that DCA website, which I just gave you the link to. And there you go. Truth in Renting and disclosures. Let's see, page 242. The book words this stuff backwards all the time. So they say the act requires residential landlords of dwellings with, I think they say 4 units or more than 3 units if the landlord occupies one of the units. So I changed that to 3 units there, because it's 3 rental units or more than 3 units if the landlord lives in one. To distribute the Truth in Renting statement to each of their tenants prior to the tenant's occupancy. Okay, so who must be given the Truth in Renting booklet? Tenants in buildings with 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in. So basically the same ones that require the state green card inspection. So that's what I wrote here in the book. Above mine, I wrote, required to be given to tenants in buildings with 3+ units, not counting unit landlord lives in.
Got it.
Anybody still writing, or you guys all got it?
Got it.
Got it.
Okay, so disclosures of owners and property managers must be made to the tenants for emergency purposes. They need to have an emergency contact. So do the municipalities, by the way. That's why when we get CO and fire inspections at tenant turnover, the municipality has to have the names and contact numbers of the tenants as well as the landlords. Federal crime insurance, we need to notify tenants that are living in high crime areas that subsidized federal crime insurance is available at a cheaper price. I'm not sure exactly what that would entail. Is that just like renter's insurance? What exactly is crime insurance? I think that would be like renter's insurance, right? I mean, for less than $100 a year, you could get $60,000 worth of coverage as a renter for renter's insurance. So I'm not exactly sure why you'd need subsidization of that, but nonetheless, it can be had from HUD. And the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, this was gone over in Chapter 4. It covers commercial properties. It says that all commercial properties must be handicap accessible. You'll get some kind of question on exams, on your state exam especially, talking about buildings that are required to be handicap accessible. It's required for commercial property. So the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this law was passed to prevent discrimination in the workplace against people with disabilities. But there's a section there that deals with the buildings being handicap accessible as well. And that's the commercial places, the workplace, right? But any commercial building. Now, the ADA also has rules. They say that new construction must be handicap accessible and meet certain requirements. However, what about the older existing structures? Well, they say that the landlord has to make reasonable accommodations to make them handicap accessible. The requirement is reasonably achievable accommodations. That means with little cost without massive retrofitting. But that could be kind of subjective. You know, I remember I was going to try to buy a building actually across from City Hall in Edison. And this was is like an older house that was used as an office building for an attorney or something like that. And so I go in there, get the city inspection done, and city's looking at it, and they're like, all right, this bathroom needs to be upgraded so that it can be handicap accessible. So you need to have it has to be wide enough here that a wheelchair can come in the door and then it can be turned around. So I was asking the guys, like, can I ask you a question? I know you're saying this bathroom needs to be handicap accessible, but how does the wheelchair get to the bathroom? Look how narrow the hallway is. The hallway was so narrow the wheelchair couldn't get down. So I'm like, you're requiring the bathroom accommodate a wheelchair, but how the hell can a wheelchair get to the bathroom? You know, and he said, well, the bathroom needs to be handicap accessible. I'm like, okay, doesn't make much sense, but okay. And then as we're walking outside, he's like, oh, and you need to install a wheelchair ramp, aluminum ramp with the metal railings. And I was like, I'll just put a block of wood there with a little bit of an angle and it'll be able to get up the little hump. He took out a tape measure and he seen that the lip from the ground to the door was more than 3/4 of an inch. And I was like, well, you could just carve a little ramp and put it there, a tiny little thing to go up it's slightly above 3/4 of an inch. It's not like he was going upstairs or something to put a ramp in. And he's like, nope, requirements say that when it's over 3/4 of an inch, you got to have ramping, but the ramping has to meet ADA specifications. It needs to be an aluminum or steel ramp with the with the handles for people as well. And I was just like, and how much does that cost about? And he's like, oh, about $5,000 or so. And I was like, oh, okay. For like maybe a quarter of an inch being above the 3/4 of an inch requirement. Okay. So at the end of the day, these city inspectors threw out tens of thousands of dollars of improvements for an existing structure that wouldn't even really make it handicap accessible. They're kind of ridiculous with their requirements. So what is reasonably achievable accommodations? That's kind of subjective, So it's useful to consult with ADA experts and architectural designers in advance, which just their consultation is at least $5,000, So reasonably achievable accommodations. Okay. But that's the requirement we need to know for exams there. Now, some other examples of reasonably achievable accommodations could be lowering wall-mounted payphones where they can be found, lowering water fountains, or a workaround around that is installing a cup dispenser near the water fountain, changing the direction in which doors open, adding ramping, changing door handles to push bars, installing auditory signals and braille buttons in elevators, or making handicap parking spaces available for people with disabilities where appropriate. So the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, applies to what types of structures? To what properties?
All new construction.
Commercial
buildings.
Commercial. And what about for existing structures? What is their recommendation?
Reasonable, achievable accommodations.
There you go. That's what you need to know for exams, my friends. And so here on page 242 and 243, we could do those highlights. Americans with Disabilities Act is the ADA. Title III of the ADA prohibits discrimination in commercial properties. And to protect the owners of existing structures from massive, expensive, extensive remodeling, the ADA recommends reasonably achievable accommodations to provide access to the facilities and services. Okay, everybody got it?
Yes, sir.
All right, what about service animals? Well, service animals, technically only a dog can be a service animal, but yeah, you could have in certain situations, a miniature horse can serve as a service animal as well, correct? So, what is required to have a service animal?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Well, they can't ask for proof, right?
A letter from the doctor or therapist on their letterhead stating that you have a medical need is all that's needed. Now, only two questions can be asked in commercial properties anyway. Is the animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? That's the only questions that can be asked. Anything else, you're discriminating. But when it comes to residential property, they have to allow emotional support animals as well. Now, emotional support animals, they don't require any kind of special training or perform any tasks. Simply having them soothes the mental condition that the person may have or their anxiety, All right. So rental referral agencies. We went over this at the end of chapter 1, if you guys recall way back when. For rental referral agencies, that's when that's a specialization where you got some real estate companies that only deal with rentals. They reach out to apartment complex owners and strike deals with them for getting paid a referral fee if anybody they introduce to the property that ends up signing a lease, that they'll get paid a referral fee. Now, we can't advertise properties unless they are actually available, right? And apartment complexes, they got their own rental offices. So they could be renting them out and we're totally unaware. Well, we need to be aware because we can't just advertise properties when they're truly not available. We have to, that's false advertising, So we need to check every day to see if a unit's available, if it's advertised. And if we don't advertise it, we just have it as an in-house listing. When renters come in, we introduce it to them in-house. So they're not advertised actively. We need to still check every 3 days with the owners to make sure that one of those units is still available. And any advance fees that a tenant may give us of $25 or more, we need to place in escrow. So let's highlight these things. This is page 244. Under rental referral agencies. Okay. Let me know when you guys have that.
Got it.
Got it.
So rent control laws are set by each municipality, and not all municipalities have them. These are laws put into place to prevent abusive landlords from taking advantage of tenants. It controls such things as raising the rents, charging late fees, and handling evictions. Licensees should be very careful when showing rental properties for sale to investors. They should use caution before telling them that rents are below market rates and they can always be raised. If the municipality has rent control, they may not be able to. That's why the rents seem like they're so low. So be careful about your puffing when selling properties to investors, because though there may be a reason why those rents are ridiculously low, and that could be possibly because they have rent control laws that forbid the landlords from raising them. And so they're not able to keep in line with inflation, raising the cost of the rental figures. Probably why they're selling the building, to get rid of it, because it's no longer profitable for them and they're needing to maintain it. And it gets harder and harder to maintain if you can't keep raising the rents to maintain it, especially as buildings get older and they need more attention. So, although rent control clearly benefits tenants, many argue that in the long run it could hurt them, because it could discourage investors from putting up rental housing, and it could cause hardship on the landlords who cannot bring the rents up to fair market values, encouraging them to let buildings deteriorate and eventually be abandoned. So I guess rent control is one of those double-edged swords as well, right? It could be used to keep landlords in line, from abusive behavior, but as those buildings start to age and they require more repairs, hey, this is a business. Landlords are not doing it as a charity. They're doing it as a place to have you live. And of course, they like their buildings to be in good condition. But if it's up to them, good condition and constant repairs versus feeding my family and making a living, they're going to feed their family and make a living and forego some of those needed repairs right? And so they let some of those buildings go the wayward, and unfortunately, the tenants get their properties start resembling slums. So those rent control municipalities with rent control could be tough for landlords, especially on aging buildings. All right, so who cannot be evicted from a condominium conversion? Once again, this is not new. We went over this in an earlier chapter. Certain tenants age 62 and older or disabled, if they lived there for at least 2 years before the conversion began, and their income is no more than 3 times their county's per capita income, or in any case more than $50,000 per year, they could remain there as tenants for the next 40 years and cannot be evicted. And it says that right there on page 245, once again, under eviction, the title eviction. So I just wrote there, condo conversion eviction. Okay.
Yep.
So the next one is under, it says constructive eviction. What is constructive eviction? Constructive sounds like construction, right? So that's exactly what it is. There's a problem with the construction. Okay. Anytime there's an uninhabitable condition and the landlord refuses to make the repairs, the tenant is not stuck there if there's an uninhabitable condition. This is an action that's usually taken by the tenant to legally terminate their lease early if the landlord fails to provide basic services and make essential repairs that make the premises uninhabitable. The tenant has to first notify the landlord there's a problem, because they're not mind readers. And if they don't fix it, the tenant can vacate, move out, and then stop paying rent after they move out. The tenant would notify the landlord they're terminating the lease early due to constructive eviction. You should seek legal advice before taking any actions, though. The landlord must return all the security deposits to the tenant, and the tenant's not in breach of contract in this instance. So here's an example I had one time with a tenant where it was a young girl with a newborn baby. I had the listing, and then she was also my client. So this is basically a house in Edison. It was a one-family house that was grandfathered as a two-family because they could rent the basement, because they had this little addition added here with a doorway, vestibule, and a stairs that led down to the basement. So it was grandfathered somehow as a two-family house. So they were allowed to keep it as a rental. So this landlord, this was basically a single-family house with the basement like that. But anyway, every time the people upstairs flushed the toilet, it would go out, hit a blockage because the sewer pipe collapsed, and then it would back up to the lowest point in the basement, which is the unit that this lady was renting, which was the tub. And she first found this out when she was bathing her newborn baby. You know, they put them in those little plastic tubs inside the tub. And she was bathing her newborn, and they flush the toilet upstairs, and then it comes out into her tub. That's disgusting. That's definitely an uninhabitable condition. So she called me up, and she was like, Vic, she's like, I don't know what to do. The landlord's very responsive usually, but he doesn't like phone calls. He only responds to texts and emails, but he's been ignoring me. What do I do? said, what's the problem? And she explains to me that this is going on, and she's been emailing him and texting him, and he's been ignoring her. And I said, well, can you document it? Can you print it out somehow and keep that record that you've been reaching out to him? She said, yeah. And I was like, okay, then here's what you do. In Edison, it is the health department that manages the rentals there. So you could go file a complaint with the health department. And then do you have anybody you could temporarily stay with until I find you another place? She's like, yeah, I got a girlfriend I could move in with. I was like, okay, then do that. Move out. And only after you've moved out, stop paying rent and notify the landlord you're terminating the lease early due to constructive eviction. But before you do that, make sure you call this attorney. And I gave her a phone number. I said, give him a call, ask him if I advised you, if I gave you the right advice to follow, because this is legal advice and I don't want to jam you up. I'm not an attorney, you know. And so she did. And he confirmed I gave her the right advice. So she moved out. She filed the complaint with the health department, which she said there was 2 girls down there at the health department, you know, behind the desk. And one of them was like, when they were, you know, when she was complaining about it, filing the complaint, the 2 girls were interested. They were having conversations with her about it. And then they looked it up. So they pulled the property up. And when they pulled the property up, they looked to see who the owner was. And the one girl was like, guess who it is? And the other girl was like, no. And she's like, yup, it's Chester. And she's like, yeah, that guy, he doesn't do anything until we force him to. You know, he'll slap paint on stuff, make it look nice, but he's basically a slumlord, you know. Until we go down there and start fining him, he doesn't do anything. So so she filed the complaint with them, and then she moved out and notified him she was terminating her lease early due to constructive eviction, and he had to pay her full security deposit back. And she's not in violation of the lease, so he can't chase after her for additional rent or anything either. And guess who I got a phone call from after she did that? Chester gave me a call, right? And the landlord, Chester, he gave me a call, and he started yelling and bitching and complaining to me. Now, keep in mind, he did not know that I was talking to her and I advised her to do these things, right? He called me up because, you know, he hired me to market the property and find him a renter. So he called me yelling and screaming that the tenant that I got him moved out early, and he paid me a commission to have a tenant in there for the full year, and she wasn't even in there for the full year. So he wants either he wants his commission back that he paid me, or he wants me to market it again to get him another tenant. And I said, well, what happened with your current tenant? You know, and he's like, she moved out early. I was like, well, you know, she's been reaching out to me because you weren't answering her, and I know exactly what's going on. You know, I was like, if you're going to be treating your tenants like this, I don't want to be associated with a slumlord who, you know, I'm going to get you good tenants and then you're going to be treating them like this. You know, I don't want to deal with landlords like that. Is this the way you normally treat your tenants? And he's yelling and screaming how he's going to sue me if I don't pay him the commission. And I was like, well, hold your horses. First of all, when did I earn my commission? What did you hire me to do? You hired me to find you a renter, to find you a ready, willing, and able renter. And I did that. We got the city inspections. We signed the leases. She got the keys. You got the money. I earned my commission, and it's now landlord-tenant issue. And if you can't keep your tenants because you're going to be a slumlord, that's on you. That's not me. I earned my commission because I got you the tenant. If you can't keep your tenants, that's your problem. You know, he's screaming how he's going to sue me. And I was like, click. I hung up on him, you know. And the guy's trying to intimidate me because he's an attorney. He should even know better. The guy's an attorney, for crying out loud. He owns a bunch of rental properties. He's a slumlord. And now he's and now he's going to start throwing his weight around, thinking he's going to intimidate me because he's an attorney and he's talking about how he's going to sue me. It's like, go ahead, click. Never heard from him again. You know, listen, you got to know your rights too. When did you earn your commission? When you produced that ready, willing, and able tenant. Then after that, you got the city inspections done. The lease date came about. She got the keys. He got the money. It's landlord-tenant issue now, right? I'm no longer involved. So a type of eviction where the tenant takes the action due to uninhabitable conditions. Constructive eviction. Constructive eviction. That's an action taken by the tenant to evict themselves, basically, when there are uninhabitable conditions. Now, there are also versions of constructive eviction where the landlord knows that the tenant's going to try to evict themselves to get out, and the landlord purposefully doesn't make the repairs, hoping the tenant takes this approach to get out so that they don't have to get them out because they can't get them out, so that they could get in another tenant in there who's going to pay more money. So sometimes they may let crap like this go to purposefully try to get that tenant to want to terminate the lease early and get out. And they think they got over on the landlord, but the landlord really, that's what their intent was all along. Okay. So in that instance, that would be illegal if a landlord does that. But constructive eviction is an action taken by the tenant to terminate the lease early due to uninhabitable conditions. Now we have your action. Suit for possession or actual eviction. This is the normal eviction where the landlord takes the action when a tenant violates the lease in some way. So eviction is the process of the court revoking a tenant's rights if the tenant breaches the terms of the lease. So the landlord would file in the court a summary or dispossess proceeding to dispossess the tenant from the property, right? So a landlord must provide a notice to quit to a tenant before filing for eviction, except if it's for non-payment of rent. If it's for non-payment of rent, tenants can be evicted at any time. Otherwise, landlords have to follow the law, and the law says, depending on what the lease violating term was, what exactly it was that the tenant did that was violating the lease, the landlord may have to serve proper notice to the tenant before they could file for eviction. So we got a little guide coming up on page 245 and 246 that I titled Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit Before Filing for Eviction. I know it's wordy, but it is very explanatory. It tells you exactly what's going on. So when can a landlord evict a tenant without providing a notice to quit?
Due to non-payment of rent.
Due to non-payment of rent. So what is a notice to quit? It is a notice to the tenant to terminate whatever lease breaking activity it is that they're doing. How much notice is required depends on what it was that they were doing. All right, so here, let's first highlight constructive eviction and suit for possession and make those notes. And as you guys do that, I'm going to go refresh my drink here. So I'll be right back. You guys can do this. So let me pause the recording. When I come back, just remind me to unpause it. All right, so now that you have these notes for constructive eviction, suit for possession, and actual eviction, let's move on to the next one. Causes for eviction. Like I said, the only reason that a tenant can be evicted without prior notice to quit whatever lease breaking activity, violating activity they're doing, is for non-payment of rent. All other reasons, the landlord must provide a tenant a notice to quit So here on page 245 and 246 in your book, this is not all on one page like it is here. I wrote at the top, Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit Before Filing for Eviction. And there's a lot of reasons. The first one we're going to highlight that says non-payment of rent. Notice to quit need not be given before the suit is filed. But for all other reasons here, you can see there's varying different periods. Sometimes it's more than one notice is needed to be provided to the tenant. But these are all the reasons that the tenant or the amount of time that's required to be served to the tenant a notice to quit. So it's a good guide if you're going to be dealing with renters at all, or dealing with property management at all, or if you're a landlord. And I also have a reference here to a TV show called The World's Worst Tenants. You guys ever see that one? There used to be a channel on TV called Spike TV. That was like a guy's channel, like a guy's channel of all kinds of programs for guys. You know, and this was actually a pretty cool show about reenactments, basically, of actual encounters with landlord tenant specialists, they called themselves. They were the intermediary between landlords and the tenants. One guy, he was a former Marine. He was all jacked up, and then he had his other buddy who was a friend that was and then his other buddy is a friend that worked with them, and his wife, which was an ex-cop, a retired cop, and they would be the intermediaries between the landlord and the tenants. So anytime landlords were having trouble with tenants, they would send them out to either serve notice to quit to the tenants, or they would go out and investigate tenants' complaints about other tenants, so the landlord didn't have to deal with it. And it was a pretty interesting show. They were showing some of their extreme cases that they came across, and it was called The World's Worst Tenants. It's actually a very good show. They renewed it, but the newer season, the third season, never came about because one of the guys, I think the main guy that was all the jacked up guy, the former Marine, he got into a fight with somebody that was in the film crew, and somebody ended up getting a broken ankle or something like that, and they got into a brawl, and somebody got a broken ankle. There was a lawsuit, and because of all that nonsense, the show never ended up. Even though it was renewed, the show never ended up going back on the air. And now the channel's not even there anymore. That Spike TV no longer even exists. It's now something else. I don't know what it's called now. But here's a link to that. And I do have these links also in that class links Word document. There's a section there where you could just search movies, and it'll show you all kinds of movies and TV shows that are real estate related that I've mentioned in this class, documentaries, all that stuff. So this is actually a pretty decent show here. You guys never watched this? It's called here's what it looked like. World's Worst Tenants. So you got this guy, the former Marine. Is that you, Jonathan? Kind of looks like you.
Could be, maybe my heyday.
His buddy and then his wife. So yeah, they had 2 seasons of this, and it was actually a very entertaining show with some pretty messed up situations with tenants. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. If you want to watch this, watch this. I mean, you could watch this on what is it? Just well, you can watch it online using this link. I'm not sure what this is, tv.movie. I'm sure you could watch this also on like Tubi TV and stuff for free. Yeah. Held at Gunpoint, Motel California, Runway RV, Burning Man, Rocket Fish, Fashionably Stupid, Hauling Ass, Naughty Nana, Hot Rods, Full Moon, Destruction Worker, Kicking Down Doors, Too Hot Tub. Oh yeah, this is an interesting one. A tenant who normally paid rent on time and was a long-term tenant for this one landlord. All of a sudden, he wasn't answering calls, or nobody heard from this guy, and he didn't pay his rent. So they found it odd because the guy usually pays his rent on time. They tried calling him to let him know that his rent was late. And so they sent them over there to check on the guy. And when they're knocking on the door, they hear, help, help from inside. So they ended up breaking down the door, only to find that the guy, when he was taking a shower, he fell in the tub and couldn't get up. And the guy was so fat, it created like a suction in the tub that even them trying to pull on him, they couldn't get him out. But he must have been stuck there for at least 2 weeks. So, I mean, that's a serious medical condition right there. Then, only having access to water, no food or anything for 2 weeks. But that was interesting. Look at some of these titles, though. Trim the Fat. Oh, Rub-a-Dub, Big Man in a Tub. Oh, that was the one. That was the second episode ever. Rub-a-Dub, Big Man in a Tub. Home on the Gun Range. Okay. They dealt with all kinds of extreme stuff. Yeah, so people with having animals. We had the one tenant, she said she refuses to pay rent because the neighbor had his dinosaur chasing her around. And he's like, dinosaur? What the hell is he talking about? And like, lady, you got to pay your rent. You can't avoid paying your rent with excuses about issues with other tenants. She's like, I shouldn't have to deal with this crap. I work hard and I come here, I pay rent. This guy's got his dinosaur chasing me around. Dinosaur. They go and they check it out. The guy's actually got a crocodile in his tub in the apartment. He's got a crocodile. And then they go look through the rest of the apartment and they find that it's like a zoo. The guy's got all these kinds of exotic animals in the apartment, and the lease specifically forbids any kinds of pets, and he's got all kinds of endangered species there, which was something. But so it's an interesting thing. It goes about all kinds of landlord tenant issues. So I just sent you guys the link to that. You can watch that on your own time if you get a chance. It's called The World's Worst Tenants. Interesting show. Interesting program. All right. So now let's talk about types of leases, which discusses payments and what's included. So on page 246, highlight types of leases, and right next to that, payment and what is included. And here we also write down the type of lease, what the lessee's responsibility is, who's the lessee, that's the tenant, and what the lessor's responsibilities are. So in this chart, you can see the gross lease is common in residential properties. You may find it in commercial, but it's more common in residential. In a gross lease, the tenant pays the basic rent, and the landlord's responsible for all the property charges, taxes, repairs, insurance of the property, etc. In a net lease, this is common in commercial and industrial property. There's also a spin-off on a net lease. It's called a triple net, or in any case, it's expressed like this, 3 N's, NNN, where the lessee, the tenant, pays a basic rent plus all or most of the property expenses, except for the mortgage financing. And the landlord may pay some property charges, except with triple net. Triple net is the type of lease where the tenant's responsible for paying their rent and all other property expenses. In a net lease, the tenant pays their basic rent and most of the property expenses, but not necessarily all of them. It's whatever's negotiated there in the lease. And then in a percentage lease, this is common in retail properties like shopping centers and malls, where the tenant pays a basic rent, a small basic rent, plus a percentage of their gross sales from their business activities. And then the lessor, the landlord, may pay some or all of the property expense charges. Okay. So you guys got your notes down there? Okay. So here we go, is just a slide with all that same stuff, maybe elaborated a little bit. Types of leases is payments and what's included. Gross lease is common in residential, but could be used in commercial. The tenant pays a fixed rent and the landlord pays all the taxes, insurance, mortgage payments, repairs, and the like connected with the property. In a net lease, the tenant pays rent and some of the property charges, whatever was agreed to in the lease. In a triple net lease, also expressed as NNN, the tenant pays rent and all other property expenses like CAM charges. CAM is common area maintenance charge. So, except for debt services, the renter does not pay the mortgage loan. They may be responsible for paying the property taxes, the landscaping, and any repairs to the property for the maintenance. It's often used in commercial and industrial properties. And once again, CAM charges are common area maintenance charge. And each tenant's responsible for their proportionate share according to the percentage of the building that they're renting. For instance, my school, I'm renting 5% of the building space. I have 2,000 square feet. I pay 5% of all property charges, 5% of the property taxes, 5% of the landscaping fees. When they repave the driveway, I pay 5% of those fees. So basically, the landlord doesn't pay anything. I even pay the landlord 5% of the landlord's insurance on the building, in addition to my own business insurance. So tenants pay all property charges. I guess that's good for the landlord in this type of building situation, right? Where they got a triple net lease. You know, the tenants are basically paying for everything. The landlord only just gets profit, right? And there's an added bonus for the landlord in that situation. Can anybody tell me what it is? Everybody calls you Lord.
Lord.
You said you like the dad jokes, right?
Good one.
Lord.
All right. So let's do the highlights now on gross lease. Yeah. First of all, let me back it up. This is not a bad slide to snap a picture of. If you didn't do it already, snap a picture of it. This gives you a little better explanation, clearer than what the book gives too. All right. Everybody get, or need more time?
Yes, sir. Got it.
All right. So here we'll highlight in the gross lease what you need to know in the book. Tenant pays that fixed rent. Landlord pays for all the repairs and maintenance of the property. This is most common in residential leases, the gross lease. Yeah, this is a screenshot from the older version of the book, but it's the same definition and the same paragraph exactly formatted. It's just that after this, they put a stupid way to remember. Whoever redid the rewrite of this book really screwed it up. Some of these easy to remember things, like I crossed it out because I think it was stupid, whatever it even said there. Remember when I'm trying to read it over the scribble that I put here over that last sentence. Remember when the landlord has to pay all the property charges, the landlord thinks that's gross, making it a gross lease. What? Does that make it easier for you to remember what a gross lease is? I think that's a corny way to try to remember something, and I think it's kind of dopey. All right. In a net lease, also known as a triple net, you may want to write that there. Triple net, NNN, common for commercial, common in commercial, for commercial or in commercial and industrial properties. And then also write in there CAM, common area maintenance charge, because it's nowhere here in the book. CAM is a common area maintenance charge. And that can be passed on to tenants as well. You know, like the landscaping fees, or, you know, the common charge for the landscaper, the taxes, the snow removal, what have you. Whoop, can you guys show me what happened on camera? There you go. And then with a percentage lease, this is common in shopping centers where a tenant pays a smaller rent and a percentage of their gross income. Like Woodbridge Center or, you know, Menlo Park Mall, places like that. They have these things. So the landlord can have an example that they give here. The landlord charges the tenant $1,200 a month of fixed rent, with a further agreement that the tenant has to pay 5% of all their gross sales to the landlord in excess of $30,000. Now, they could also put another stipulation in there that the tenant needs to gross at least $60,000. So these are the ways that this can be structured. So that's a percentage lease. This is why, have you guys ever gone to Menlo, any of those big malls, and you've seen that there's a store there that seems like they're doing killer business. They're always busy and packed and mobbed. And then next time you go there, they're gone. They're shut down. They're no longer there. You ever wonder why?
Yes.
Because it rents too much.
Yeah. It's usually a percentage lease situation where maybe they're paying a small fixed rent and the landlord required them to pay a percentage of their gross sales. And they could have had a requirement a further requirement that the tenant had to have at least a certain minimum in gross sales. And they may have been really busy in selling their widgets. That's the made up product that they sell. So they're very busy selling widgets, but those widgets are not yielding enough money to satisfy the landlord's voracious appetite for the rents that they wish to collect. And therefore, the landlord terminated the lease early because the tenant, even though they're busy selling widgets, they're not selling enough widgets to satisfy the landlord's desire for the amount of money they wish to get as income. That could be why. Okay, everybody good with the notes?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mhm.
All right, now here's how you calculate a triple net lease. I mean, you got the rent and you have CAM charges. CAM charges are the common area maintenance charges, and the tenant's going to pay whatever the actual charges are for that month. Even if the landlord just gives you an estimate of what they're going to be, the tenant will pay whatever the actual charges are. So that amount can vary. but the rent does not. So if you're renting at $20 per square foot, the CAM charge is estimated at $5 a square foot. You don't just do, oh, well, it's $25 a month per square foot, or $25 per square foot, and then you're renting 2,000 square feet. So then it's $25 times 2,000. That's incorrect to do, because you'll never know what your actual rent is, because the CAM part is the part that could vary. So you should calculate them separately. So to know what your rent is, if you're renting 2,000 square feet and you're paying $20 a square foot, it's 2,000 times 20. That's $40,000. That's not per month, though. Divide that by 12 months, and your monthly rent is $3,333.33. Now we could calculate whatever the CAM charges are. If it's estimated to be around $5, that's 2,000 square feet times $5. That's $10,000 a year divided by 12. That's an additional $833.33 a month. And that amount will vary. Sometimes it could be more, sometimes it could be less. So the rent, you know exactly how much that is, and the CAM charge deck varies. If it actually is $5 a square foot, then that brings it up to $4,166.66. So CAM charges can really jack up your rent there a bit, huh? So commercial tenants, this is how you calculate the rents for commercial tenants. If the landlord just gives you a quote of price per square foot, you ask them, well, how many square feet? How much are you asking? Oh, we're asking $20 a square foot. Well, this is how you calculate the rent. You times that by the rent, the square footage, by the rental, divided by 12. That gives you the rent. Okay. And when we talk about percentage leases, these are common in large shopping centers. And here's that explanation again that I gave you, the breakdown. And then when they talk about other lease types, they're talking about provisions added to longer term leases. For rent escalations. So if you have like a 5 or 10-year lease, there could be provisions added to that lease that automatically escalate the rental charges at different years of the lease term. So that's what we mean by variable leases, are provisions added to long-term leases with built-in predefined escalation charges tied to either a cost of living index, which we call the COSI index. So it could say, okay, next year, how much are you paying for rent? Well, you got to look at the second Sunday of the January in the New York Times, what they list the cost of living, the COSI index to be. So if it's gone up by a certain percent, that's how much your lease will go up by. Or they could just say outright, your rent will go up to this amount or by this percentage on the anniversary of your lease. Okay, that's a little bit more common than the COSI index stuff. All right, ground lease. Remember, I told you never confuse a ground lease with a land contract. What was a land contract that we learned last chapter?
Land contract.
Yeah, what's a land contract? It's also known as installment sales contract. It's a type of seller financing where the landlord does not give you the deed until you paid off the full amount owed. Do not confuse a land contract with a ground lease. A ground lease is a long-term lease of the ground, which is just undeveloped raw property, where then a tenant would erect a building on it. So the tenant would now be responsible for maintaining that property and paying all the charges for it. Do the taxes go up when you have a improvement on the land?
Yes.
Okay, so the ground lease, the tenant would be responsible for paying the higher taxes now. They'd be responsible for maintaining the building that they erected on that property, etc. Now, these are usually long-term leases because uh, why would you build a building on someone else's property unless you have a long enough lease to enjoy it for the juice to be worth the squeeze, right? So it is not uncommon for ground leases to be 50 to 1,000 years in length. 1,000 years? Who the hell lives to be 1,000? Nobody. However, corporations can. You know, funds can, investment funds can, corporations can, and they both can own real estate. So it is not uncommon for 50 to 1,000 years to have a ground lease. Here are some famous ground leases, and ground leases are usually triple net. The tenant's responsible for the rent and all property expenses for the maintenance. So here's some famous ground leases. The Empire State Building, the MetLife Building, the Chrysler Building, the former World Trade Centers before they got taken down by terrorists. And the land is actually owned by the Port Authority that they're sitting on. Don't confuse it with a land contract, which is a type of seller financing. And then we also have mineral leases, which sometimes they're referred to as subsurface rights, the mineral leases, or oil and gas leases, where the landlords rent the land to a tenant who extracts those minerals from the ground, and then the landlord collects the rent, plus they share a portion of the profits. Oil, gas, gold, silver, or whatever other minerals it is. You guys ever see shows like the Alaskan Gold Rush, where those wannabe modern day gold prospectors are searching for the land, trying to figure out by looking at the contours and the layout of the land, trying to figure out where the glaciers were, to try to find where the gold could possibly be in the ground. And once they think they know where it would be located, they bring in all kinds of heavy machinery and start digging the ground. And they build a sluice box, which basically runs the dirt through it with water, trying to pan for gold at a faster rate to find gold. So they move tons and tons of dirt trying to find the gold. And they need to move tons and tons of dirt and pan for it just to get a couple of ounces of gold. But then again, how much is gold going for today? Even though the gold prices are starting to go down just a little bit as our economy is starting to improve. What are they, $4,000? $4,000 an ounce or something like that? Anyway, if you haven't seen it, check out those programs. They're still on TV somewhere. I think Discovery Channel or one of those. All right. So let's highlight these. Variable leases, just write provisions added to long-term leases. Ground leases is also a triple net lease. And then highlight the first sentence there. And then oil and gas leases, just write mineral lease.
Got it.
Okay. Look at that structure right there. The Empire State Building. Could you imagine constructing such a building on land you don't even own? That is something. And now that's a worldly iconic structure. It was built during the Great Depression to give jobs to people, and then became a center of the financial hub in New York City. Huh. Interesting. So, what are the primary functions of a property manager? Anybody?
Preserve the value.
Yeah, I left it up there too long, huh?
While generating income.
All right. So here, the primary function of a property manager, when I usually ask this question, people are like, oh, to collect rents and evict tenants and to maintain the property, but if you were to look back, that's looking too close and micromanaging. If you were to take the 1,000-foot view of it, it's maintaining or increasing the value of a property while generating income as an agent for the owner. And you do that by securing suitable tenants, collecting rents, caring for the property, budgeting and controlling expenses, hiring and supervising employees that would be employees of the property owner, not the property management company, versus hiring independent contractors who would work for the property owner, keeping proper accounts and making periodic reports back to the owner of the property as to what the status is. So let's highlight here on page 248, the property manager is someone who preserves, and then pencil in, put a little arrow there, or increases the value of an investment property while generating income as an agent for the owners. All right, so property management agreement is a written agreement that creates the agency relationship between the owner and the property manager. It acts as the limited power of attorney, which defines the scope of authority granted to the property manager and how they could legally bind the owner of the property to contracts. So while most real estate agents function as special agents, property managers function as general agents. General agents can do more than special agents can. They can legally bind their clients to a contract within the limited scope of authority that was granted to them by the property owners. So that property management agreement acts like a limited power of attorney. Now, property managers, just like special agents, they have fiduciary duties that they need to follow. Code, remember, care, obedience, accounting, loyalty, and disclosure. How do most agents work?
What do you mean by how do most agents work?
What kind of agents are they? Special or general?
Special.
So what does that mean?
Um, that means
That means they cannot legally bind their clients to contracts.
that's what I was thinking. I just couldn't say it.
Or another way the book may explain it and exams may ask it is that they could work in one capacity only, which basically means they were hired by the owner of the property to sell it and find a ready, willing, and able buyer, or if they were hired by a buyer to help them navigate the purchase process. But they can't legally bind their clients to contracts, signing contracts for them, accepting offers on their behalf. They're hired to work in one capacity only, to market the property, to find a ready, willing, and able buyer, and then to present that offer to the owner. And it's up to them to decide what they want to accept. You cannot legally bind them to a contract. However, general agents can. Now, how can general agents bind their clients to contracts? A different story. That depends on what authority was granted to them by their clients, the owners of those properties that they're managing, and what document gives them that authority.
The lease.
The power of attorney documents usually grant the authority to someone else to legally to bind them to contracts. But how do property managers get that authority? It's through their property management agreement. The property management agreement acts like your limited power of attorney, where the owner of the property grants you the authority to legally bind them in certain ways on certain issues. Like if you're a property manager, are you responsible for filling vacancies?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, probably. But so you're allowed to select the tenants.
You're asking?
Yeah. Are you allowed to select the tenants?
Yes.
It depends.
Depends on the requirements.
It depends on what they agreed to in the property management agreement. One landlord may say, yeah, you have the authority. Your job is to fill vacancies, get us tenants, but we got to select the tenants.
Okay.
Or they could give you that authority. It depends on what it said in what you agreed upon with the owner in the property management agreement. Okay, so let's just say they give you the authority to select the tenants. Can you sign the leases with those tenants? Or does the landlord need to sign the lease with the tenant? Or did they give you that authority to sign the lease that would legally bind them, the landlords, to the contract with the tenant? It depends. What does it depend on?
The agreement.
What it says in the property management agreement, which acts as your limited power of attorney that grants you that authority, right? So they property managers act as general agents. General agents can do more than special agents. They could legally bind their clients to contracts. What determines how they can legally bind their clients to contracts? The property management agreement, which is basically their limited power of attorney that limits how the scope of authority that was granted to them on how they could legally bind them to contracts. And that was negotiated with the owner in the property management agreement when they hired. So those property management agreements are not universal. They could vary greatly from one property owner to the next. So let's highlight a property manager is usually considered a general agent, whereas most real estate brokers function as special agents. You're very special. Don't forget that. That old Saturday Night Live clip. You're very special. All right. All right, now I don't have the screenshots that I added to the slideshow yet. I don't believe so. Let me take a look. Nope, I don't. But we can still go over this. Property management concerns would be things like budgeting expenses, the operating expenses and capital expenditures, renting the property, setting the rental rates, tenant selection, collecting the rents, maintaining or improving the property, hiring employees versus contracting for services, and even evaluating the insurance policies to ensure that the property owner has the proper amounts of coverage. Not too much of this, make sure they have enough of that type of coverage. Now, you're not the expert in insurance, but you could get an insurance expert to come in and evaluate what kind of insurance they have to get the suggestions of the proper coverages. All right. So one interesting thing here in this, in the rest of this chapter, which talks about the duties of the property manager, is on the bottom of page 249, going on to page 250. They talk about setting rental rates. It says, in establishing rental rates for a property, this is just for your own edification, not for exams. It says, in establishing rental rates for a property, a basic concern must be that in the long term, the income from the rental spaces covers the fixed charges and operating expenses and also provides a fair return on the investment. Consideration also must be given to the prevailing rates in comparable buildings and the current level of vacancy in the property to be rented. Supply and demand. Following a detailed survey of the competitive space available in the neighborhood, prices should be noted and adjusted for differences between neighboring properties and the property being managed. Annual rent adjustments are usually warranted. Apartment rental rates are stated in monthly amounts, but office and commercial space rentals are usually stated in either annual or monthly rates per square foot of office space or of space. If a high level of, now this is an interesting paragraph right here. If a high level of vacancy exists, an immediate effort should be made to determine why. A high level of vacancy does not necessarily indicate that the rents are too high. The trouble may be inept management or defects in the property. The manager should attempt to identify and correct the problem first, rather than immediately lowering the rents. Conversely, a high percentage of occupancy may appear to indicate an effective rental program, but it could also mean that the rental rates are too low. You're renting them out really quick because you got a great deal. You're charging not enough rent. With the apartment houses or office buildings, anytime the occupancy level exceeds 95%, serious consideration should be given to raising the rents. Because what's your job as a property manager? To get the most money you can for the property owner, right? You guys ever see strip malls that have one unit that seems like it's been vacant forever? They don't seem to have a problem. You know, they're getting tons of people. I'm sure they're making inquiries into wanting to rent it. Why is it vacant for so long? Well, they're trying to get as high a rent as possible as they can for it. So they're not going to cave and just take a low rent because somebody's there that wants to rent it. They figure, well, I mean, something is better than nothing, right? Renting out that space. Well, maybe not. Because a vacant space could be a tax write-off until they find that right tenant who pays enough rent to make the juice worth the squeeze. If you guys are interested in becoming property managers and or at least like to study a little bit about the field, there's a class you could take called the CPM, the certified property manager. Now, I'm sure there's other courses out there too. This is one that was created by IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, in cooperation with BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association. You could also take classes or subscribe to or become a member of this community called CAI, C-A-I. That's the Community Associations Institute. And they give classes and they also trade information. It's basically groups of property owners and managers that they share information with each other on different new laws and tactics and ways to do things, and share different software that they may use to manage property and things of that nature. So CAI, the Community Association Institute, this is a resource for those involved in managing condominium complexes and the like. And I got a bunch of resources down here for you about these different classes and that you could take and such, like the CPM. I think the CPM course, that one cost about $1,200, I think. Tax deductible, business expense, and you learn how to manage it. And you got a bunch of training resources here too. All these links also can be found in the class links Word document. And there we got it on page 251, talking about the CPM. This actually was created, let me see, the Institute of Real Estate Management, IREM, was founded in 1933, and they're part of NAR, the National Association of Realtors. Members may earn a designation of CPM. The Building Owner and Managers Association, BOMA International, is a federation of local associations of owners and managers, primarily of office buildings. Participating in groups like these always allows the property manager to gain valuable professional knowledge and to discuss their problems with managers facing similar issues. A growing field is the management of cooperatives and condominiums. The manager hired by a homeowners association must develop different techniques because owners and tenants are one and the same. The Community Association Institute, CAI, is a nonprofit association founded in 1974 to research and distribute information on association living and offers training and designation for specialized management like this. All right. And that concludes this chapter. Let's do the key terms to review for chapter 12, and then we could take our lunch break and look at the time. The doppia ora, that means the double hour. It is 12:12 right now. Completed chapter 12, and the time is 12:12. How about that? All right, so let's do the key terms to review. Number one, landlord's responsibility for decent conditions.
Implied
warranty.
warranty.
Habitability. Yep, showing that it's habitable for humans, that there's no condition that poses a threat to the health or safety of others. So 9 is A, implied warranty of habitability. A transfer of property by lease.
Demise.
Yes, 4 is B, demise. A situation where a tenant remains after the lease period has expired.
Over tenancy.
Yes, 8 is C. A contract between the landlord and the tenant transferring the right to use real property for a specific period of time in exchange for rent.
I thought I was muted. I thought I was unmuted the whole time. Lease.
A lease, yes. 10 is D, a lease. A lease for a definite period of time.
Estate for years.
An estate for years. 5 is E. A suit for possession, legal removal of a tenant.
Actual eviction.
Yes, one is F. A rental of land on which a tenant erects their own building.
Ground lease.
7 is G. A tenant, what do they also refer
DC.
to it? The lessee, 1 is H. I'm sorry, 11 is H. The lessee is the tenant. A lease under which the landlord pays taxes, insurance, and other expenses. The landlord pays the taxes, insurance, and other expenses.
Gross lease.
Gross lease.
6 is I, the gross lease. A transfer of primary responsibility for a lease to another party.
Assignment.
Assignment, 2 is J. Tenants forced to move because the rental unit is uninhabitable.
Constructive eviction.
3 is K, constructive eviction. All right, key terms 2. A lease in which the tenant pays expenses like property. The tenant pays expenses like property taxes, insurance, and so forth.
Net lease.
It is a net lease. 3 is A. A tenant remains after the lease term without the landlord's consent and not paying rent.
Tenancy at suffering.
9 is B, a tenancy at sufferance. A lease which the landlord shares in the gross receipts of the tenant's business.
True.
Suppose percentage of lease.
Yep, the percentage lease. 4 is C, percentage lease. A lease with regular payments and no stated ending date. It automatically renews.
Tenancy at will.
Not at will. What kind of lease automatically renews for the same amount of time it was originally written for?
Periodic lease.
It's periodic lease. 5 is D. A person who looks after another's rental real estate. What do we call them?
Property manager.
6 is E, the property manager. A tenancy that may be terminated when the landlord or tenant wishes.
Tenancy at will.
A tenancy at will. 10 is F. Landlord's court action to evict the tenant.
Sublease.
Suit for possession.
A suit for possession. 8 is G. 8 is G. A transfer of only a portion of the lease.
Sublease.
7 is H. Property manager's employment agreement.
Management agreement.
The management agreement. 2 is I. State requirement that tenants be notified of their rights.
Truth in renting.
11 is J, the truth in renting. And another word for landlord?
Lessor.
The lessor. 1 is K. And that's, my friends, I believe. Let me just check. Yep, that's it. That concludes chapter 12. So